we stop populating. So welcome everyone. My name is Chris Zellers and I'm with Rutgers Cooperative Extension of Cape May County. Welcome tonight to the Ocean City Libraries hosting me here tonight for Canning at Home Basics. So this is a basic canning course. If you're experienced, you might pick up some information, but it's also really good for those folks that are just starting with canning, or those folks that just maybe need a refresher or reminder. Before we get started, I would like to say thank you to the Ocean City Library, as well as especially Julie Howard, who is always so gracious and wonderful about setting these things up. So thank you, Julie, and welcome everyone from the community. Just a really quick overview of Rutgers Cooperative Extension. I am with the Family and Community Health Sciences Department, where I am an assistant professor educator for the community. Rutgers Cooperative Extension is part of the Rutgers, New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station, and Rutgers is a land grant university. So that means that we have cooperative extension services throughout New Jersey, and our job is to support the community with educational information that's scientifically based, scientifically research based. And Rutgers Cooperative Extension is a partnership between the Board of County Commissioners, Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, and the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Right now, we're happy to say that we have faculty and or staff in all 21 of the 21 New Jersey counties, which we didn't always. So we're very excited to be able to offer our programming throughout the state. We are composed of 3 departments. We have agricultural and natural resources, 4-H youth development, and then, like I said, my department, which is family and community health sciences. Here at FCHS, we provide outreach in New Jersey and beyond on topics related to nutrition, chronic disease prevention, food safety, and overall wellness. At the end of the presentation, I'll share with you my Facebook information so you can check us out on social media. We try to do posts that are relevant. We give recipes and some videos and other webinars that you can watch at your leisure that are recorded on our YouTube page. So we hope that you'll check us out. Also, I'll provide my email address. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out. I do get back to you. And if I don't have the answer, I will always try to find the answer for you. I do want to just go back a second. This presentation was originally created by the Cooperative Extension of University of Georgia. So I'd like to thank them for the creation of this presentation. And it was modified by my colleagues, Sandra Grenzi and Daryl Minch. And I've since updated again, just to give us a little bit more of a virtual feel. So it's a little more up to date with the virtual things. But we, did have the input of those folks, and I appreciate that. So thank you to them. Rutgers Cooperative Extension is an affirmative action, equal opportunity employer. Its programs and materials are open to all without regard to race, color, national origin, gender identity, religion, age, height, weight, disability, political beliefs, sexual orientation, marital status, family status, or veteran status. All right, so let's get started. If you have any questions, I'll answer questions at the end from the chat. And like I said, if you think of afterwards, you think you have a question, then please don't hesitate to reach out to me later. Today's discussion has 3 objectives. So we're going to talk about basic food safety guidelines for home food preservation. That is a really, really important topic because we want to make sure that we're safe. And then we're going to talk about approved standardized methods for canning acid and low acid foods. And we're going to talk about reliable sources for food preservation. Next up, this is, if you would be so kind to grab your smartphones, take them out, open your camera, and just hold it up there to the QR code, and then you'll see a little yellow thing pop up, and you could click on that. That's so you can take a survey, and you can do that at the end, please. I'll also pop this slide up at the end, but this just gives me an idea of how my teaching is, what you thought of the presentation, and it's really important to us here at Rutgers, so we have an idea of how to better form and inform our audiences, better form our presentations and inform our audiences. So if you could be so kind, that would be great. And again, I'll pop it up at the end. Little thing, if you leave your email after you do the survey, it's a really quick survey, it's only a couple questions, but if you leave your email, I'll put you in the drawing to win a prize. So that there's a benefit for you to take it, hopefully. All right, so why should we preserve food at home? Why is that a good thing to do? So sometimes you can save on the grocery bill by preserving food. I know that when I've done it in the past, it's always nice to be able to pull out something that I've canned and say, oh, like, I'd like this, I'd like to use this tonight in the cold winter months. So you can save on the grocery bill that way. You could support sustainable lifestyles by doing it, and you could manage nutrition. So it help what's going into your food, and you could enjoy creative recipes and cooking from having those things on hand. So I'm sorry, as I mentioned in the last slide, having that produce preserve offers good nutritional value. So for instance, canned fruits and vegetables are good substitutes for fresh fruit or vegetables when you can't have them, when it's cold here in New Jersey. And some canned products provide more nutrients than others. So the lycopene in canned tomatoes, corn, and carrots have vitamin C in some cases. And they have that lycopene in there that has been shown to be good for preventing some cancers. So canned produce provides this year-long availability, and consuming it with can be good for us. And you want to use unsalted and juice packs, which are also make it a little bit more nutritious for us. So good reasons behind the nutrition content as well. So we're going to start out here with some basics of home canning. And to get started, let's just talk about the basics of what you do for home canning. So you want to make sure you have high quality food being selected, and according to specific directions. You're going to follow the USDA tested recommendations. I'll give you those in a little while about what the sources are that are good. But it's important to remember that we're not taking this stuff, if you have a home garden, you don't want to go out there and say, like, August and some stuff has fallen off and it's in the bottom of the garden, you gather that up and go can it. You want to use that high quality food to can, because that's going to give you your best results. Food also is placed in a canning or mason type jar with 2-piece lids, and then it should be heated to a temperature that destroys microorganisms. And this is important too, the mason type jar. Now there's a lot on the market. You'll get the pretty color ones, or you want to make sure that they're the mason jars that are used for canning and not just decorative ones, so that they're able to withstand the heat that you need to get them to be safe. The heat that we use in canning inactivates enzymes that can cause change in color, flavor, and texture. And air is driven from the jar during the heating process. And as the jar cools, that's when that vacuum gets sealed, and that's what helps to keep it safe, so that we can put it on the shelf in a cool, dry place without a lot of light for it to remain safe. The canning methods that's approved for food depends on certain characteristics of the food, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Foods are divided into 2 main categories. There's acid foods and low acid foods, and that's in terms of canning anyway, not in other terms, but specifically for canning methods, you have your acid food and your low acid food. Acid foods are foods that contain enough acid to prevent the growth of bacteria that cause botulism poisoning, and low acid foods contain very little or no acid. So let's talk a little bit about acid foods and what's that means. The term pH is a measurement of the acid level in the food. So pH is measured on a scale from 1 to 14. The closer the pH value is to 1, the more acid the food contains. A pH of 7 is neutral, so it's neither high nor low. Obviously, it's in the middle, right? Acid foods have a pH less than or equal to 4.6. Acid foods include most fruits. However, tomatoes, figs, and Asian pears are borderline, and specific amounts of bottled lemon juice or citric acid must be added to them before canning to ensure safety of the recommended process. Acid foods also include sauerkraut and naturally fermented foods that are preserved by natural acid produced during the fermentation process, and foods to which large amounts of acid, usually in the form of vinegar, are added. And an example of that would be pickles. And just to back up a second, as I'm going through the list here, add lemon juice before canning. And you can see when I said bottled lemon juice. So you don't want to use fresh squeezed, you want to use bottled. And as we go through, I'm going to keep reminding you to make sure that you're sticking to recipes that are accurate recipes. And same with that lemon juice. That's one way people might, not use the bottled. The reason we're using the bottle is to make sure that acidity level is safe so that we're not getting sick. Nobody wants to give something away for the holidays that makes a friend or family member sick, right? Acidity varies by variety. So with the tomatoes, it's really important that you follow that recipe, because again, that acidity, say that 10 times fast, varies by the variety. Growing conditions and the stages of maturity also cause some acid variations. And then you want to make sure that you're using slightly underripe or firm tomatoes, not those overripe ones that I talked about that might have fallen to the ground in the garden. You want to use the firmer ones or slightly underripe. You're going to add acid to all tomato products prior to canning. For pints, you add 1 tablespoon bottled lemon juice or a 1/4 teaspoon citric acid. And for quarts, it's usually 2 tablespoons bottled lemon juice or a 1/2 teaspoon of citric acid. And just to mention too, in case this is your first time on one of my presentations, I follow up with an email from everybody that was registered. So there'll be a recording of this sent out afterwards from my YouTube page. And then there'll also be information that I'm using here today that you'll be able to use for your purposes of canning healthy. All right, so let's talk about those low acid foods. So foods are considered to be low acid foods, again, if they have a pH greater than 4.6. This category includes vegetables, meats, poultry, seafood, soups, and other mixtures of both acid and low acid ingredients. And an example of such a mixture would be spaghetti sauce with tomatoes, meat, and vegetable. pH below 4.6, generally all vegetables, meats, again, that list there that I just went through, and I can send this out at the end. All right, so what are the approved methods of home canning? Some of you may have, again, be a little more experienced, and those methods that are there. We have the water boiling canning, and then we have the pressure canning. So there's 2 approved methods, and the boiling water canning is usually used for canning acid foods. At sea level, water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and as altitude increases, water boils at lower temperatures. Since lower temperatures would be the reason behind this is lower temperatures would be less effective in killing bacteria. So processing time would have to be increased as altitude increases. So if you're joining us from somewhere outside of New Jersey, that would be, where you're in higher altitude, that would apply there. Here in New Jersey, we're okay, no altitude issues. Pressure canning is the only safe method for canning low acid canned foods. So when canned under pressure, temperatures higher than the boiling point of water can be reached. These higher temperatures of 240 degrees Fahrenheit are necessary to destroy those spores of bacteria that cause botulism. And botulism, as you know, is a very deadly type of food poisoning. And, those spores of bacteria, they cause spoilage. So you want to be very cautious with that. And that's why we have the 2 different methods and why the temperature gets so hot. So for the boiling water canning, you want to have 6 inches of water simmering or hot in the canner. And this method is used for hot packed jars using simmering water. Raw packed jars have the hot water also, and you place those jars on the rack in the canner. And the water is going to be 1 to 2 inches over the tops of the jars. For the boiling water canning procedures, if you need to, you can add more hot or boiling water if necessary. I have the different tools listed out, but I know sometimes people like to, measure the temperature, and that's a really good idea especially if you're going to be adding water during the process. You want to make sure you're getting it up to temp there. Begin timing the process when a full boil is reached. So you're going to wait until you get up to that full boil before you start your timing. And then again, adjust the altitude for over 1,000 feet above sea level. After processing time is completed, turn off the canner, remove the lid, and wait 5 minutes before removing your jar. You want to remove the jars straight up out of the canner. So again, I'm going to show you, there's a little cloth thing that you pick them up with, pull them out, keeping them level. You pull them out of the canner and place them on the padded surface away from draft. So you can lay a tea towel out or a couple tea towels out to put them away, put them on the counter there. And you want to make sure they're not, under a fan or an open window or anything. And then you're going to leave them undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours. And you're going to check the seals. You're going to remove those rings, wipe off the jar before you start in a cool, dry place. And here in New Jersey, again, we don't have those altitude concerns, but you want to be conscious if you are joining us from somewhere else. All right, and then we have here the pressure canner shown. You don't have to use the pressure canner if you're using the boiling procedure that I talked about in a few slides. But again, there's those circumstances that, you might want to do that to prevent certain items from having getting contaminated. So to use the pressure canner, you're going to proceed. You're going to want to have that 2 to 3 inches of water simmering on the hot canner, hot pack jar simmering water, well packed jars hot water. So you're kind of going through that same process again. Put the lid on the canner with the weight off or pet coat open. And you can see from the picture here some of the features on the pressure canner. We have the flat rack in the bottom that you can see there in the I guess that's would be the whiter colored where you can see the cans in there. You can see the flat rack on the bottom. The pressure regulator or indicator, dial or weighted gauge, and in the older ones you have the petcock, sorry. The vent pipe or port for pressurizing, and then the safety valve or overpressuring plugs. Safety locks when pressurized, and then flexible gasket is in the lid, or one type might have the metal to metal seal, and the gaskets are sometimes called the sealing rings in the manufacturer's book, so you're aware of that. I do usually when we show this the pressure canning procedure, or a lot of times people that are on the call here do ask us about getting those gauge checked. It is difficult to find someone. If you are in need of having your gauge checked, reach out to me and I can connect you with some. I think they do it at Gloucester County Extension. They used to do it a lot more, and we don't have as many now, but I think they have the equipment at the Gloucester County office to do that. So I can connect you with my counterpart there if you're in need of that. And if not, we'll find you somebody. And another question I get is what type to use. That it's really just a personal choice on what you want to use. So to continue on with the pressure canning procedures, you want to exhaust 10 minutes, steady stream of steam escaping, close that vent or petcock, count time when correct pressure is reached, adjust for the altitude if you need to, again, turn off heat at the end of the processing, and let that pressure drop to 0. Then you're going to wait about 2 minutes after the pressure drops to 0 PSIG to make sure no pressure remains. And some canners, they're going to have, you want to check the locks or the handles are released. You're going to remove the weight or open that petcock, wait 10 minutes, and then open the canner and be careful of the steam. And then remove the jars to a padded surface or rack, just like you did in the other method. Cool the jars 12 to 24 hours undisturbed, and check that the jars have sealed. And we're going to talk about how to do that in a few. So why is it necessary to pressure can low acid foods? Our friend, known as botulism, Cholesterollum botulinum, the bacteria that causes botulism, is a spore former. And when conditions aren't favorable, when the conditions are not favorable, the organism begins to grow. You get high heat, dryness, etc. The bacterial cells form a protective structure, called a spore. And, in order to destroy that spore, we want to make sure we have the higher temperatures than boiling. So if those spores are not destroyed, they're going to germinate and they're going to produce toxins in the food when the food is stored on the shelf. And then you're going to, give it to a friend or family member, or maybe eat it yourself, and you're going to become sick. We don't want that. If you do not can low acid foods in a pressure canner, it could be trouble. The temperature that is a temperature that is in danger zone is between 40 and 140. So if you're not getting your temps up above that, then you can definitely have an issue with the botulism. If there's a lot of moisture in the jar, and if there's no air in the jar, it's already vacuumed off. So you want to make sure that you have the conditions that are not going to encourage botulism. We don't want to allow those spores to germinate and create that toxin and flourish. So make sure that we're getting to the temperatures and following directions exactly. Being safe while you're preserving food is really essential to preventing that illness. And here's why it's so important to be mindful of the process techniques. Food can contain toxins without showing signs. My husband says to me all the time, here, smell this. Is it bad? You cannot smell if something's bad necessarily. Something could be, you could have botulism in something and you're not going to smell it. So foods can contain toxins and not show any signs of it. So, again, you want to make sure you're getting your temps up to where they need to be. Symptoms of botulism usually appear within about 12 to 72 hours. A lot of people will experience some type of digestive upset. You could have blurred or double vision. You could have difficulty swallowing, difficulty speaking and breathing, and it could even result in death in severe cases. So want to be cautious. And as I said, I updated this slide presentation. So I went in and checked a lot of the information. There hasn't been any updated information about the number of people sickened in home canning situations, or that have died in home canning situations since 2014. I don't know if they just stopped doing that or what the situation is, but it happens. So you want to be really cautious. And here with the introduction, Julie and I were just talking about this before we let you all into the presentation. With the introduction of social media platforms, people are starting to post unsafe ways to preserve and can. And that's why it's so important to follow directions exactly from a reliable source. Because if you're getting something off of social media, they might not have been from a reliable source, and you're going to be saying TikTok made me do it. So be aware, because you don't want to follow those recipes that are not reliable sources, and we'll talk in a minute about what those reliable sources are. Botulism can be prevented, as I said, if you follow the rules. The spores will not germinate in acid environments. That's why we're careful to make sure we have the right amount of acid in the recipe. And tomatoes and pickles, we want to make sure that we're getting them to safe levels and doing them in a boiling bath water. Spores can be destroyed when heated long enough at a specific temperature. And that's another reason why we want to get to temp. And for canning low acid foods, USDA recommends a canner temperature of 240 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level. And temperatures this high can only be reached in a pressure canner. Pressure processing is the only safe way to can low acid foods. So just wanted to take a minute to step aside and talk a little bit about recipes. I've mentioned following directions to a T before in the presentation, but I just wanted to give you this this kind of idea of what's going on here with the recipes. So this looks yummy, right? It's crock pot apple butter. It's probably really good, but it's not being canned. So it says down here, put apple butter in a sterile canning jar, boil lids and put onto jar, then put rings in. It should be sealed. So again, it's not going into that pressure canning. This is fine. It's probably okay if you want to put it in the refrigerator and use it right away, but it's definitely not something that's going to be shelf stable for a long period of time for a number of reasons. The recipe is not giving specifics on the amounts. So if you're looking at a recipe on social media, or you're going through an old journal from the family, a recipe book, and there's not specifics on there, don't use it. I know those recipes are great handed down memories, and people say to me all the time, well, my grandmother used it and she didn't get sick. Our food supply is drastically different than the food supply and the food chain that is now. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're not doing something that they used to do that could make you sick. So you need to get rid of any recipes that don't have specific amounts on them. And you also want to follow the directions of something that's from one of the reliable sources now. Here's another example. So here they are, putting the amounts in there, but they're doing tomatoes, and you all know what I've been saying about tomatoes with the lemon juice and the acidity. So this is an example of how you could get yourself in trouble as well, because you're not looking at a way to keep those acid levels the same. And again, there's all different varieties and acid levels. So that's why you want to make sure you follow the recipe and put that acid level in to get it all to the same level. So it's where it needs to be safe and to prevent botulism. All right, and then this one is a tested recipe from the University of Georgia Extension. And you can see in here, we have explicit directions. We have the hot packs. We have the amount of minutes on there, the pounds of pressure, the weighted gauge. This is really, really a good example. And, it says at the top, the first line, unless a tested recipe is used. So we want to make sure that it's a tested recipe and it can be done safely. We have exact amounts, and it's keeping with what we need to do to be safe. Sources really do matter. It's one of the challenges of my job right now with the world we live in is everybody has everything at their fingertips. So it's really easy to get sucked in by algorithms on social media. I looked at this, so now I'm going to get a bunch more. When you do that, you're kind of setting yourself up. If it's something that sounds too good to be true, or it's coming from a place that you can't verify the source, then beware, be cautious. Besides selecting appropriate methods of cannings, there's certain other rules that you really need to follow to have products canned safety. If the directions say to peel and chop, then do it. If they say to leave it whole, then leave it whole. So if they're saying whole tomato, put that whole tomato in, whatever it is. You want to make sure that you're following those directions on how to chop it. If it says process 30 minutes for pint jars, then put it in pint jars, and don't process it for 20 minutes. Don't process it for 25 minutes. Process it for 30 minutes if it's that time frame. If you're pressure canning in a dial gauge canner, your gauge must be tested and accurate. Whatever type of canner you have, it must be operated correctly. You may need to those altitude adjustments, again, depending on where you live, and only use directions from those reputable sources. Ready? Here they are. USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, a cooperative extension office. So for instance, this was written by University of Georgia, cooperative extension. I'm from Rutgers University, cooperative extension. So you want cooperative extension, USDA, or the National Center for Home Food Preservation. You can also use the Ball Blue Book, but make sure it's an up-to-date one, because what happens is you have that Ball Blue Book and it's not up to date. So you want to make sure that you get one that is, that is up to date. Make sure that you were not using those social media recipes or the ones handed down from a beloved family member. So here are those lists again. They're the reputable sources out there. And the reason that these are reputable sources, incredible sources, is that they're using the most up-to-date science. They're people that are involved with our food chain supply. They're involved with how things are being grown. They know the science behind the food contents that you're using, the produce you're using. So that's why they're a reliable source. Any other source could be very dangerous. And I'd like to point out that the Center for Home Food Preservation has a blog, and you can go to that blog. So just search, Google National Center for Home Food Preservation, and you can look at their blogs. And in that area of canning, you might want to check that out. They have different trends that are going on, I guess is the best way to put it. And they have those different trends on there, so you can check them out and they'll dispute why they are not good trends to have. So you want to make sure that if you're having a sudden, you're on social media, something pops up and you say, hey, I really like to try that out, and you're having that little lapse of judgment, then check it out. So this is an example of what they have on there now. So apparently there's this new trend of dry canning of vegetables. And you can see here where the X is on the left-hand side there, that's dry canning these vegetables. And as it states in this blog, there's a risk for botulism, food poisoning that we've been talking about here. And it can be fatal. It can make people really sick. So you don't want to do that. You cannot dry can, no such thing for carrots. So do not dry can carrots. So that's just an example of, the blog and how you can go search that out. So they're not necessarily going to have everything that pops up on social media. That stuff's way faster than probably the blog is. But it'll give you an idea of some of the things going on, so you can check that out. All right, so timing is everything. We talked about the temperature, we talked about, following the recipes, but canning processes are determined for specific foods prepared by specific directions for a size of the jar. And the process time is determined based on the length of time it takes to adequately heat that jar, like all the spots in that jar, the coldest spot in the jar. So that's why being mindful of the time the recipe suggests is a good idea. The way the food's prepared, such as the size of the pieces, with or without peel, and the consistency of the canning liquid are all considered in the timing method. And the size of the jar can have an effect on how the heat penetrates through the product. So it is really important to follow those timing measures as well. Follow directions exactly. I know I said it a couple times, but it is crucial. If you're going to add extra, if you add extra sugar or fat, or if you don't prepare the food according to the directions, or if you add thickeners like starch, starch, or you put rice or noodles in there, then the process time tested could be inaccurate. So you want to make sure that you're following the recipe and you're following those directions, so you get those cold spots heated up in the center of the jar, so that botulism can't do its nasty old thing to you. And times differ with the sizes of the jars, and that's why it's important to pack, use the kind of jars that you're supposed to. Also, when you're canning, you can't rush the process. There's no easy way. If you're going to be canning, for those of you that have done it before, it's an all-out event. You can't say, oh, I'm going to get this in really quick before I have to go to a wedding or something. That's not going to happen. You want to make sure you heat up and cool down times as part of the process. So don't try to cool the canner down quickly, by doing it, setting it under running water or something like that. You want to make sure that you're following those times exactly to be safe. All right, here's different methods for packing. And again, we can see, it was really hard to find pictures that have canning. I'm going to have to make some shots of my own, but this here, you can see, this is not the ring lid that we talked about. So that's not a good idea for packing. They're great if you're going to put them in the fridge or something like that and use them right away, but those lids are not, going to be difficult. They're not going to have the ring we're talking about. So the method of packing the jars also plays a really important role in the heat transfer through the product. In a raw pack, raw food is placed directly in the jars. Then the hot boiling water is poured over the contents, and they're packed firmly, but you don't want to crush them. So you want to get them in there, but not so much that you have to smush them and crush them. Free the bubbles or the trapped air between the pieces of food, and then wipe those jar rims and add the lids and adjust the band rings, and then you can process it. That's for the raw pack. And then the preferred method for hot pack, the preferred method of pack for most foods is going to be that hot pack. So in a hot pack foods are cooked in liquid before packing them. Then the cooking liquid is poured over the food in the jar. And the advantages of this method are that fewer jars are needed. There's less floating of the food because the air has cooked right out of it. And the color and flavor are better retained. And the foods are easier to pack in these jars because they're more pliable. Also follow the directions for specific types of packs that are called for. So we're watching the recipe, we're watching the time and the type of pack that we're using. If the directions only list hot pack instructions, then you're only hot packing, okay? When filling the jars, it's important to not overfill them. And we call the head space at the top of, we call that space at the top of the jar that we're not overfilling with, that's called head space. And that it's important, you know, to check the bottom of the lid for the headspace. So check the directions for the correct amount of headspace called in a recipe, because they should give that in the recipe too. And for jelly, it's usually about 1/4 of an inch. For acid foods like fruit, tomatoes, and pickles, it's about 1/2 inch. It's going to be 1/2 inch. And for low acid foods like vegetables, meats, and mixtures of low acid and low acid foods, it's usually 1 inch. What happens if you don't have the correct headspace? So if you don't have, if there's too little food, too little headspace, food may bubble out or run over during the process. We don't want to do that. And then deposits on the rim, you know, if you get it on the outside, if you have deposits on the rim there, it might not allow the seal to seal properly, and we don't want that either. If there's too much headspace, the food or the top of the jar is likely to discolor during storage, and the jar may not seal because of the air was not forced out. So again, headspace, another important area to watch when you're doing your packing. This is an example from Ball, and it demonstrates the proper fill lines of the jar. You can see here that there's the 1/4 inch, the 1/2 inch, and the 1 inch marks on the top of the jar for headspace. So you can see where those lines line up there that you can use for those purposes. All right, so now we've gone through the rules and regulations of following that recipe and doing all that stuff we're supposed to do. Let's talk a little bit about some of the canning tools and the importance of those. Jars and lids, super important. And to prepare jars for canning, you want to make sure that you wash canning jars. Don't use those jars if they're chipped or scratched. You know, use them for something else if you want, but not for canning. And you want to keep them hot until they're used. So sometimes you can pull them out of the dishwasher, they'll be hot and you can use them. You want to prepare 2-piece canning lids and ring bands. So it's a canning lid and the ring bands, and according to the package instructions for the brand you're using. You want to make sure to remove air bubbles. Use a plastic knife or bubble freer for this so you don't scratch the jars, and wipe the jar rims with wet, clean cloths or paper towels to remove any residues that might be left on there. And also you want to remember to adjust the 2-piece lids, tighten until they're fingertip tight, you know, when you're twisting it. So you got your fingertips and they're tight that way. These are some examples of what the jars and lids look like for those beginners on the call. And it's important to use real mason jars. As I said at the beginning of the conversation, the decorative ones sometimes are not, they're just used for decoration. So be cautious of that. You can put the correct lids. You want to make sure that you have metal screw bands and sealing compound on the metal in the center there. And you want to make sure to get rid of any lids that have rust on them, or make, use them, they try to clean them up, or use clean ones, because it's worth, making sure you have fresh products on there that are going to work. The vacuum seals is really important on the lid as well. It keeps the food preserved and the food safe and fresh. And that seal holds the lid on the jar. It prevents recontamination of the food or contamination of the food, and it prevents air from drying out the food. So again, it's going to be what helps to keep that food fresh and yummy. When you check the lids after you have canned your foods, listen for the pop when you open them. So the lid should be curved inward and it won't move when pressed. You can see them press it on there. Give a little tap, and then you should hear a clear ringing when you tap it. So it's a little ringing sound in there that you know that you've got it on the money. Shown here is another important tool, the funnel, which is wide enough to get the product into the jar using a ladle. And you might want to put something like a tea towel or something underneath of it when you're working. I know if it's a sticky thing, like if you're making strawberry preserves or something, strawberry jam, you want to make sure that you got something underneath there, or your whole countertop might be forever sticky. So something that you can wash and clean in addition to wiping off the counters when you're done. But this is a great tool to have because it helps you not get anything on the rim of the glass or rim of the jar there. So it's able to seal properly. As I mentioned towards the end of the presentation, this is the QR code. You can take a minute to pull out your phone and get that if you didn't get a chance to get it in the beginning. And again, I appreciate your feedback. And then let's just talk a little bit. I mentioned earlier in the conversation, the jar lifter, really cool little claw-like tool that helps you to navigate those hot jars and lift them out of the boiling water. So another important tool to have on hand if you're going to be canning. You can see not very clearly there, but there on the side, you have the jars that are being cooled there after they're pulled out. Storing your hard work's really important too. So make sure to store it in a cool, dry place after you're all done the processes. You want to avoid anything that has extreme temperatures. So for instance, if you're putting it in the basement, maybe where in New Jersey it gets cold in the winter, or out in the garage or something like that, it gets cold. You want to avoid that extreme temperature. You want to try to keep it at the same temperature in a cool, dry, dark place because you don't want the sunlight to get in there and tint anything either. You also want to use that product within the year for the best quality. So if you're if you're going to do this on a regular basis, you want to anyway, even if you're not doing it on a regular basis, you want to label what is inside. So you can see this one here. We have apricot and vanilla bean preserves. Sounds yummy. They were made August 13th of 2011. So we won't want to use these, right? Because they're less than a year out. And then they were handmade by Erica Straws. So these labels can serve two purposes. They're kind of good if you're giving them away as a gift. It's fun, but also it tells you what needs to be used. Okay, I'm coming up to August. I'm going to need to use this preserve because it's within a year. So it gives you an idea of what's good and what's not. This is just the disclaimer credits, and then photography credits. I didn't put I'll have to put it in the chat. I didn't put my my things. I thought I added that slide on. So sorry. I'll put my email in the chat box now so that you guys can have it in case you have any questions. And also I'll put my my webpage in there too. So does anybody have any questions for me? Here's my email address. And if you search FCHS, if you search this on Google, you should be able to find my webpage and the Facebook pages. Sorry about that. I thought I added it on, but I must not have done that. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll gladly answer them. Again, if you've been doing this a while, it's important to go ahead and say, oh, I might not want to use the recipe that was handed down for generations. If it's handwritten, it's a great thing to keep for that person's handwriting. But if it's been handed down, then it might not be good. We get calls all the time. One of the calls one of my colleagues in Atlantic County got one time was that a person had found some very old cherries, I guess they were, preserved in alcohol. And she said, I think they're still good. I'm calling to find out if they're still good. And my colleague was like, no, don't eat those. We don't know how old they are because they weren't labeled. We don't know what they used or anything. So you don't want to use that product. And the person said, well, they're in alcohol, but that doesn't make a difference. So you want to make sure that you're labeling, you're using those recipes, and if they're older or they're, if they're new and they're from social media, check and see what the source was. I put those up earlier, and like I said, I will send them out at the end, but you want to make sure that you're using one of these credited, recommendations from the USDA or cooperative extension offices or National Center for Home and Food Preservation, or the Blue Book that's current, not one that's maybe been with the containers that you bought 10 years ago. They do update this information, so it's important. All right, well, I don't see any questions in the chat. Again, feel free to reach out to me. I put my email in the chat if you have any questions. And I appreciate you coming tonight. I really want to thank Ocean City Library for having me. It was great to be here. And I thank everybody. It was great to see you. Have a good night.
Thank you so much, Christine.
Thanks.
For a great program, and thanks everyone for coming out.
Thank you.